In the quiet town of Kidi, where time flowed slowly like an old river, life seemed endless with tranquility and serenity. The residents of this small corner of the world were accustomed to each day being much like the last, and no one expected that this solitude could be disrupted. However, fate had its own plans, and one fateful night everything changed. In cottage number 28, which always seemed so cozy and peaceful, a real tragedy unfolded. The sky was covered with dark clouds, and the air was filled with a vague sense of foreboding, portending disaster. When the bodies of John and Dana Sharp, as well as their younger son Justin, were found in the morning, the community was shaken. The townsfolk could not believe that such a thing could happen among them. Everyone knew the Sharp family as good and respected people, the epitome of family life. Only the surviving Justin could tell what happened on that terrible night, but his memories were confused and unclear, like a dream that is hard to remember upon waking. He couldn't explain what happened, and his words seemed nonsensical and disjointed. The investigation of this terrible crime took a lot of time and effort. Sheriff Greg and his team examined every aspect of the case, scrutinized every clue, hoping to find answers to all the questions that arose during the investigation. Soon it became apparent that there were two unexpected guests in the house: Marty and his friend Bo. Their presence in the town became the key to unraveling this mystery, but even after numerous interrogations and checks, the case remained inconclusive. Years passed, and the mystery remained unsolved. But one day in a neighboring county, the remains of a woman named Sina Sharp were discovered. This discovery revived interest in the case, and Sheriff Greg could not remain on the sidelines. Turning to Private Detective Mark Gamble for help, Sheriff Greg and his team embarked on a new stage of the investigation. They studied every detail, reviewed every document, hoping to find the key to solving this mysterious story. Gathering various clues and testimonies, the investigators began to understand that the murders could be linked to various motives, including romantic intrigues and drug trafficking. But even with such evidence, the case remained tangled and unclear. The Sharp family, survivors and victims, continued to wait for justice, hoping that the truth would soon be revealed. They could not understand how such terrible events could happen in their world, which seemed so safe and peaceful. The detectives continued their work, and with each passing day they were getting closer to the solution. They explored every corner of the town, every inhabitant, hoping to find the key to unraveling this mysterious story. Finally, after much effort and long hours of work, the investigators came to the conclusion that the answers to all the questions were already before them. They gathered all the evidence, testimonies and clues, and finally, at that moment, the mystery was solved. It turned out that the murders were connected to long-standing family conflicts and dark secrets that had been hidden behind a mask of tranquility and harmony for many years. The motives for the crime were complex and convoluted, but the detectives were able to uncover them thanks to their persistence and determination. The Sharp family, survivors and victims, finally received the long-awaited closure to this tragic chapter in their lives. They could finally begin to heal and move forward, leaving this nightmare in the past. And so ended this dark story, leaving behind only memories and lessons that would forever remain in the memory of the townsfolk of Kidi. The investigation of the crime remains unresolved, and although there are many clues and theories, no suspect has been definitively charged with the murder. Thus, the story remains open. In the quiet town of Pineville, nestled among forests and hills, a gruesome murder occurred that shook the entire community. The Whitefield family, who lived in a secluded house on the outskirts of town, was found dead in their own home, with their son Jacob being the only survivor, barely making it to the neighbors before losing consciousness. The police quickly arrived at the scene and began investigating, hoping to unravel this dark and mysterious case. At first glance, everything pointed to Jacob as the sole suspect in this horrific crime. However, as the investigation progressed, it became clear that the Whitefield family harbored many dark secrets, and the story of this family turned out to be much more tangled than initially thought. The father of the family, John Whitefield, was a successful businessman, managing a local furniture manufacturing enterprise. He was known in town as a stern but fair man, always striving for success and the prosperity of his family. The mother, Alice Whitefield, was a caring wife and devoted mother, but in recent years she had been suffering from depression and alcoholism, which strained her family relationships. and their brother Daniel was known for his temperamental outbursts and unstable character, often getting into scandalous situations and dragging his family into trouble. Gradually, as the investigation progressed, various versions of what might have happened on that fateful day began to emerge. It turned out that there had been a conflict in the Whitefield family regarding inheritance and finances. Records of arguments between father and son, as well as debts that no one knew officially, were discovered. Many believed that the conflict between John and Jacob could be the key to solving this tragic case. Detectives working on the case diligently searched for evidence and interviewed numerous witnesses, but each new fact seemed only to be a puzzle piece in the larger picture they had to put together. With each new discovery, it became clearer that there was something more to this crime than just a family dispute. During the investigation, it was revealed that Jacob was involved in shady dealings and had connections with suspicious individuals. He denied his involvement in the murder and claimed he was home that night, but his words were not backed up by any evidence. Detectives worked tirelessly to unravel this complex and convoluted story. With each new fact discovered, it became increasingly clear that there was something more to this crime than initially thought. Finally, after numerous interrogations and analysis of evidence, detectives were able to identify the threads that led them to the real killer. It turned out to be Daniel Whitefield, the brother of Alice and uncle of Jacob. He murdered his relatives out of selfish motives, seeking access to their inheritance. Jacob was completely exonerated, and Daniel was arrested and stood trial. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of his own family. The story of the Whitefield family became the subject of discussion throughout the country, leaving a bitter trail behind and forever changing the lives of everyone involved in this heinous crime. The tragic story of the Whitefield family became the subject of discussion throughout the country, and many Ponyville residents still couldn't believe that such a thing could happen in their small world, where it seemed that everyone knew each other and no one hid anything. But the lesson they learned from this tragedy was important. One should not underestimate the power of dark secrets and mysterious motives that may lurk behind the everyday facade of life in a quiet provincial town. In a deep protected forest, drowning in darkness and mystery, lived a psychopathic maniac, about whom there were terrible legends. His name was known only in the terrible stories passed down from generation to generation, and in the cries of those who did not return from these forests. It was believed that this psychopathic maniac was hiding in the depths of dark thickets, where even the sun's rays could not penetrate through the thick foliage. He waited for his victims, hiding in an ambush like a shadow, and chose those who dared to climb into his territory. The first terrible evidence of his deeds appeared many years ago when a group of researchers decided to explore these forests. They disappeared, and their disfigured bodies were found later, crippled and searched, like toy dolls in the hands of a mad child. Since then, fear and horror have captured everyone who has ever heard about the mysterious psychopathic maniac. People tried to bypass these forests, and those who still decided to take such a risk did it only with caution and fear, as if in anticipation of imminent danger. But even the most cautious could not always avoid meeting the maniac. He was cunning and dexterous, able to go unnoticed until it was time for the attack. His victims often did not even have time to understand what was happening before they found themselves in his claws. Legends said that this psychopathic maniac was more than just a man. His strength and cruelty seemed supernatural, as if he had been sent from the darkest corners of the human subconscious to terrify everyone who dared to violate his territory. Every rustle in the forest, every dark corner caused people to tremble in awe. They knew that the psychopathic maniac was still hiding in these thickets, and he would not stop until he found the next victim for his gloomy games. And although many denied its existence, explaining what was happening by a series of accidents, there was a fear in the hearts of every resident that these were not just stories for fun, but a real danger waiting for its next moment of reprisal. You know how he got into these forests and why he chose them as his refuge. Some say that he was born and raised in this gloomy corner of nature, under the rule of dark forces that awakened a monstrous thirst for blood in him. Others assume that he came here from afar, running from my own ghosts of my past, trying to hide from the world that betrayed him and left him alone with madness. But no one knew exactly what dark secrets were hidden behind his gloomy look and bloodthirsty deeds. The psychopathic maniac continued his terrible creations, leaving behind only bloody traces and broken lives. His shadow hung over the forests like a curse, forcing even the most desperate to prefer to bypass these places. One day, in the darkness of the night, a girl named Alice got lost in this sinister forest. She was on her way to her house, but lost her way because of a thick, foggy veil that fell into the forest suddenly. Step by step, the heart beating in perseverance, Alice continued her way through the sinister woods. Her legs were trembling, her voice stuttering as she shouted the name of her friend, who was supposed to meet her on the side of the forest. But there was no answer, except for the echo of her own voice reflected from the trees. Suddenly, from the darkness, she heard the rustle of the branches and the whisper of breath, which made her freeze in place. She stopped, shuddering with fear, her eyes staring into the dark, trying to see something. But all she saw was the shimmering shadows and contours of trees absorbed by the night darkness. A quiet but confident step approached her, making her heart beat stronger and stronger. She felt that something sinister and dangerous was next to her, preparing for the attack. And then she saw him, a gloomy figure protruding from the darkness, with a recognizable figure of a psychopathic maniac. His eyes sparkled in the darkness, his mouth was distorted in a sinister smile, and his hands were holding the weapon of death. Alice froze with horror. Her eyes widened with horror when she realized it was the end. The psychopathic maniac slowly approached her. His steps were heard in silence, like the blows of death. She closed her eyes, praying for salvation. But instead of a blow, she heard a voice, quiet and mysterious, whispering to her words of comfort and hope. It was the voice of a stranger who came out of the darkness to save her from a certain death. She opened her eyes and saw him, a mysterious stranger shining in the darkness like a saving angel. His eyes were determined, his mouth radiated unshakable power, and his hands were ready to fight evil itself to save it. As if in a dream, he took her by the hand and led her to a safe place, away from the gloomy forests and the deadly threat of a psychopathic maniac. His presence was for her a source of comfort and hope. His voice was the sound of salvation and light in the darkness. She believed in him as the last hope, as the last support, and they left into the night, leaving behind the shadow of a psychopathic maniac tearing the hearts and souls of those who dared to break his dark refuge.